Hey guys, Normie Gardner here, and I'm going to do a video on the differences between Christianity and Buddhism. Now, before we start, when we talk about Buddhism, we have to make a distinction at the very beginning between the Western secular kind of Buddhism, which is basically compatible with atheism, and which was pretty much, if you look at the history of it, an invention of the Chinese communists, and the more ancient form of Buddhism, which I don't really know much about. I'm going to be talking about the first form, the atheistic Western form of Buddhism, in this video, because that is really the pertinent issue. All right, because what's happening is that a lot of people adopt this form of Buddhism as a way of, getting some sort of shaping their life in a moral way, in becoming a good person. And I'm not against anyone, of course, becoming a good person. However, there's a limit to how far you can take this, and I think that Christianity can make you even a better person, and actually is also more true to life. So I want to talk about the differences between Buddhism and Christianity. And so I'm going to be talking about Buddhism in a general sense and Christianity in a more specific sense. So here's the thing that both religions focus on: the self, ourselves, our human consciousness, our desires, things that we do badly. Why do we do them badly? What's the remedy? How do we become better? Let's talk about the self first. Now, the first thing we want to say about the self is that it is a mystery. We don't know what causes the self. We don't know what ends the self. We don't know if the self exists after death or not. And anyone who says differently is lying. We don't know the answers to any of those questions. We don't know where self-consciousness comes from. We don't know where free will comes from, except that it definitely exists. I don't think there's a reason to doubt that free will exists unless you want to doubt that free will exists. We have these selves. We do things. We are aware of ourselves. Unlike any other animal, we can say I. We can say you. We can distinguish between ourselves and our base instincts. We can take control of our instincts. We can do things. Also, we can do bad things. What is the self, and how do we deal with it? Now, there are two things that we can see about the self. One of them is that it exists, and the second thing is that it is sort of messed up. Our sense of ourselves is very skewed. There's something wrong with us. We always seem to screw things up. We always seem to do bad things. Now, both Christianity and Buddhism have answers to this. The Buddhist answer to that is that the self doesn't really exist, that there is no self. The traditional form of Buddhism would say that the self is just part of the Brahman, part of God, and the atheistic sort of Buddhism would just say the self is just, you're just an animal, you're fooling yourself into saying that you're real. In either case, they deny that the self exists, and our illusion, our pipe dream that we have a selfhood is something that we need to get rid of. And that's the cause of our trouble, is this sense of self. We want to annihilate the self. We want to reach nirvana. And that's how we can cure our problems. Now, the Christian answer to this problem of the self, like what is wrong with ourself, is that the self is good. God gave us the self. God made us as rational, self-conscious beings. However, we have something twisted around ourselves. We don't know ourselves very well, and in order to become healthy and whole, we need to kill this animal self-love and achieve a more perfect appreciation of ourselves. And the only way we can do that is by aligning our will with the will of God. And God's not going to make us. He's asking us to align our will. And if we can't do it, He will offer help in the form of grace that comes from the sacrifice of His Son, Jesus Christ. That is the Christian answer to the problem of the self. The Buddhist answer is there is no self. The Christian answer is our selves are messed up and we can repair it. The Buddhist rejects the idea of self. The Christian does not. There is a distinct and key difference. It's important to focus in on this difference because, I'm not going to say more than that. So, how about this? Suffering. Where does suffering come from? So the Buddhist answer to that comes from desire. It comes from, we have all these desires, all these things that we want. And this doesn't just include desires we would think are bad, for greed and lust and, avarice. No, these are any desires. All these desires, we need to get rid of them. It's all an outgrowth of this cancerous illusion of the self. No, we should desire nothing because we can't possess anything. Desire is what causes suffering. And if we get rid of all desire, then we will have no suffering. Nothing will harm us. Now, the Christian take on suffering is that it comes from sin. Now, let me be clear about this. The Christian desire, the Christian idea of suffering is not that I individually sin and therefore I suffer. No, it means that the whole world is infected by sin. Sin is like this disease or this cancer, this if you ever see a tree and you see a vine around the tree killing it, that's what sin is like in the Christian worldview. And the infection of sin basically has infected our entire world, like in our entire universe, but especially this world right here, planet Earth. And so sin is not just responsible for our human suffering that's caused by other humans, but it's also responsible for hurricanes and tornadoes. Like, our whole world is thrown off kilter by sin. Sin has just made everything bad, has just skewed everything and cracked everything, and we're like a broken car that's sort of chugging along still, but essentially our whole world is fallen and broken. That's what the Christian idea of sin is. And all of our suffering comes from this sin. How do we get rid of suffering? Well, first thing is that Jesus, through his sacrifice, paid for our sins, and if we stick close to him, we can overcome our sins, and he will give us the help to do so. But also that the way we overcome our suffering in ourselves is there's a couple of ways. First of all, we can embrace our suffering as a way of being closer to Jesus. This is the Christian talking, right? And also, so suffering can become a good thing. And also, we can, and this is important. Suffering isn't always a bad thing in Christian thought. Sometimes it's a good thing. And if you don't really understand this, if you think suffering is bad, not suffering good, then you might get into some weird situations where you look at someone like Mother Teresa and say that she's a sadist because she said some things like the poor can find value in their suffering. And that means that she loves suffering and she's a sadist. No, that's not what it means. It means that you can find value in suffering. So Buddhism doesn't find any value in suffering. Christianity does. That's a key difference, all right? Buddhism sees suffering as bad, and this makes sense. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense. Christians see suffering as, well, it can be good to suffer. And this also makes sense if you think about sacrificing yourself in order to get, and this is not a Christian idea, this is just a common sense idea, you go on a diet to get thinner, like you're suffering through that diet. Christians can see what we call redemptive suffering or constructive suffering, where you can suffer and that can cause a purpose. Purposeless suffering that has no purpose, even then Christians can say you can find a purpose in that suffering. Now this is also a good take on suffering as well. Both takes you can get stuff out of, and I'm sure that there's many times when suffering is caused by inordinate desire. But the big difference here is that the Christian does not see all desires as being bad. Rather, the Christian sees all desires as not being focused on the right thing. Basically, and it goes back into our next topic, which is desire. Buddhism, like we have already said, desire is bad. Desire is bad. Desire is bad. Don't desire anything. The Christian says your desire is skewed. Your desire is not towards the right thing. You think you want this, but actually you want God. Basically, the Christian view is that God is the fulfillment of every desire. That everything that we desire is really a desire for God. That the good and the longing that we have in our hearts for this certain thing will be fulfilled in God. We just don't know it because we can't see God because of our own sin and our imperfections. It's not like God won't show himself to us. It's more like we can't see him. We just cannot see him because we are blinded by our sin. And our desire, even for the most crazy base desire, has at its core it's something that's been twisted, not something that's bad by itself. Do you know what I mean? Like, say, you desire lots of food. You want to be fulfilled. That desire can be fulfilled in God, in a sense that, any kind of, that's a bad example. I can't think of how to get it right. Something like, say you desire lots of sex. You're addicted to porn, Well, the fulfillment of, sexual intercourse in Christianity is a symbol for God's love for the church. In other words, it's a pale imitation of what God's love is like to us. Sex is just a pale imitation of what God's love is like. That's why the Christians have this idea of the Virgin Mary. Well, at least Catholics do. Like, why would you, and I heard a really good talk explaining this to us. Like, why didn't Mary ever have sex with Joseph after she gave birth to Jesus? And I think it was, the answer was, basically, for Mary, having sex with Joseph would be like peanuts, because she has seen the desire and has that fulfilled of being with God, which is basically all sex is like a pale copy. And it's really hard for us to understand this as moderns. Like, something can be better than sex? Yes, something can be better than sex. And it's really hard for moderns to understand this because we're so obsessed with sex. But it's still true. Something can be better than sex. And we just have been blinded by our sin. We just have been looking down. We're too easily satisfied. We don't see this. So all desire, from a Christian view, is not bad. It's just twisted. And we have to untwist it. We have to get it straight again. We got to point it in the right direction. That's the Christian view of suffering and the Christian view of desire. So I hope this has helped to point out some of the differences between the Buddhist and the Christian worldviews. They are very similar and they produce similar people, but at their core, they are definitely different. And you have to decide for yourself which one makes more sense to you. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel.